If there's one thing worse than missing a long dead game franchise or shut down online game, it's missing an unliked dead franchise or online game. Throughout my years playing video games, I've always been drawn to the forgotten game, the experience that was rougher on the edges or underappreciated when it launched. Games that tried to do something new and branch out into new territories, but either failed or were overlooked in their efforts. There's a certain fascination to these games, a glimpse into something different, a what-if moment. Most of my favourite games are these kinds of experiences. Back in 2010, I swore by the original Nier, despite being regarded as a fairly average game by most. I found myself mystified by games like Folklore as hidden little pieces of forgotten gaming, or games like Fragile Dreams, as games that weren't entirely great, but that tried to do something unique with the platform. I'm sure this fascination is going to be great for views. Games that, regardless of overall polish and execution, delivered wholly on offering players something new, something unseen or experienced before. Dust 514 was not a great game. When it launched, it was a bizarre and questionable experiment, and when it ended, it was still largely just that. An FPS spin-off to the ever-ambitious space sim MMO EVE Online, developer CCP tried to do something truly unheard of with Dust, allowing PS3 players to be the boots on the ground to EVE's space generals. It didn't really pan out. The choice of launching the game exclusively for the PS3 was an odd one, given Sony's notorious inability to play well with others, a point continually reiterated today. Trying to coordinate interplay not only between two games but between two consoles was no easy task, and overall the game never quite realised the dream of its early trailers, before it was eventually discontinued on May 30th, 2016. A classic tale of ambition outstretching capacity, what perhaps stings most about the story of Dust 514 is that where most ambitious projects remain trapped in development hell, or the concept stages, or simply release a disappointment, the genius of Dust could be experienced. 5 years on, and Dust 514 is still one of the most unique, ambitious, and engrossing online experiences I've ever had. For its flirty shooting mechanics, muddy graphics, and impenetrable design, remain one of the most rewarding and truly unique online experiences no game since has taken its place, and I find myself 2 years on, still missing Dust 514. The game came into existence when EVE Online's Tyrannus expansion added planetary interactions, opening up planets into the game. It was here that CCP had the ambitious idea to add ground combat into its universe. However, this ground combat wouldn't take place in EVE Online, but in a completely separate game, in which players' victories and defeats on the ground would translate to the economy and efforts of the players up in space on EVE Online. While initially intended to be released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, Xbox was dropped in favour of Sony's console, as it was a more open platform, allowing Dust 514 to connect to the EVE Online Tranquility server, whereas Microsoft's Xbox Live did not. The irony is not lost on me here. Hype for the game quickly grew after its shown at E3, with its ambitious scope impressing journalists and gamers alike. The idea of being able to play with other players across platform was still something rarely seen in the industry, and the game's persistent planetary scale was, and still is, unseen in modern shooters. The hype was steadily building. For EVE fans, this was an exciting new way to interact with the world they loved, and for newcomers, it was a chance to jump into a game world that was previously daunting. It was all shaping up to be a success. Previews of the games were impressive, and though the game's long beta period brought up a couple issues, everyone was still waiting with excitement at the game's launch. Even disregarding its many unique attributes, Dust 514 was also significant as one of the first, and at the time only, big console free-to-play games. This was when the genre was taking its first steps into the console market. Dust had a lot to prove as the first merged game, the first persistent universe FPS, and one of the first free-to-play console games. And when it launched on May 14, 2013, it didn't really go to plan. Being hit with scores ranging from 4 to 6 by most major publications, Dust did not have a smooth landing. By the time it shut down on May 30th, 2016, its Metacritic score stood at 59 out of 100. Dust 514 had a lot of problems coming out the gate, pertaining to its questionable connectivity with EVE Online, confusion progression systems, and tech issues. But what crippled Dust 514 were its third-rate shooting mechanics. Watching any of the major video reviews gameplay of Dust 514, it's visible to see just how much trouble people were having with this game. Aiming was mushy, hitboxes at launch were a crapshoot, and the game's sensitivity was all over the place. This was a problem that persisted throughout the game's life. Even looking at gameplay from skilled players after updates and patches still show a game that just never really nailed the shooting mechanics. Seeing two players jump around each other while they each sprayed hopelessly was a common sight. Players using shotguns would awkwardly bump into each other as they each tried to land a hit, and don't even get me started on the vehicles. The game's confusing health system didn't really help matters either. Players used suits in Dust, highly customizable outfits that you could augment and upgrade to best suit your playstyle. These suits had a health system similar in principle to Halo, but more accurately similar to Section 8. Health and shield bars were long in Dust, and I could recall times I'd unload an entire clip into a guy, only to have him turn around and waste me in a couple of shots. As previously mentioned, Dust 514 was a free-to-play game, and what most players would be spending their real-world money on was fittings. Different to most games though, these weren't permanent. Everything in Dust was finite. Each gun you used, suit you donned, and the vehicles you called down to battle had a limited stock. Whenever you died, you lost one of said stock, and when it was gone, that was it until you restocked it. To Dust's credit, the basic fittings were bought with in-game currency, and that was thrown at you in abundance. Dust didn't so much feel paid to win due to this lack of permanence, that it was always hard to feel as though you were being fairly done to. While most of this comes down to the layers of customization and suits, I'm sure I'm not the first to admit that while you were playing, it often felt like you were at some undetermined disadvantage. So by now you're probably rereading the title of this video and wondering why I've been lambasting a game I claim to miss. Well, as they say, we criticise the things we love, and to be sure, Dust 514 is still to this day one of my most cherished and beloved gaming experiences. Dust delivered on the kind of multiplayer experience I haven't found since, and though the above issues levelled at the game caused many to leave and promptly forget, for those who stayed and broke through Dust's hard shell was something unreplicated in the gaming industry, and it's one that's hard to forget. For as much fun as an online shooter can be, I find that the one problem that pulls me away from all of them in the end is a lack of permanence. There's only so many endless leaderboards and in-game achievements I can obtain before I eventually get tired of the moment-to-moment gameplay and leave. There was no persistence to keep me invested, no long-term effects that the in-game matches had that made them worthwhile, outside of a pastime or a few free hours. Dust 515 had an entire universe filled with alliances, clans and squads fighting over and taking over it. As previously mentioned, Dust was fully connected to the EVE Online universe, the same universe that makes internet headlines year after year, with stories of epic space battles involving thousands of players, hundreds of thousands of pounds lost in ships, deep linked faction betrayals planned out over years. EVE Online and the exploits of its players are some of the most fascinating in the gaming industry. A genuine space opera where all the lore and stories were created by the players that inhabit it. But like most people, that's exactly what they are, stories. EVE Online is the kind of game that makes World of Warcraft look like a casual experience. It is dense and requires an ungodly amount of time to get into and understand. It's a big prospect for an adolescent who thought completing a Persona game was a big commitment. Dust 514 was the entry point into this universe, a way to streamline the space epic into the narrow viewpoint of an FPS, and ease a player in. While the game never got to truly shine in the same way as the epic space battles and betrayals of EVE did, echoes of that space opera and truly player-created story twinkled throughout the experience. A match in Dust had real consequences. Planets were lost, solar systems were dominated, and players were hired to fight for real corporations in EVE. Where most games have a cliche of calling players mercenaries or guns for hire, in Dust this was actually true. The game's meta was an insanely deep experience, whose layers felt endless, for better or worse. When I started out in Dust, I was having a similar experience to a lot of the reviews at the time. The moment-to-moment gameplay wasn't enough to make Dust worthwhile, and the game was confusing to navigate. But as I continued to play, admittedly for the most part because I was a broke teenager and had no choice, I started to dive into the game's progression systems, finally dusted off my mic and began asking questions in the game's many in-game chat rooms. Each step I took further into Dust's world was rewarded with deeper and deeper layers. I began to see how much more rewarding the game's gameplay was when I was engaging as a team. I met players who were more than happy to help me understand the game. I had a bizarre conversation with a guy asking if he was able to live in England after going to jail, and my barely adolescent ass giving advice like I knew jack shit. And I joined my first corporation. It's in the corporations and squads where Dust really took a life of its own. People took this game seriously. Despite striking up a friendship with a corp member, I had to officially put in for an application just to be accepted. When I was greeted by the corp's leader, and after that, I got my first taste of the real meat of Dust, factional warfare. To playing with the corporation for a few days, and bonding over Final Fantasy Crisis Core, I received an official call to arms. Our corporation had set the date for our first major battle, and we were fighting for our first planet in the game. From there, we'll be able to begin making a name for ourselves in this universe. As the only little Brit in the corp, I was asked to wake up early. Admittedly, early for a 17-year-old was about lunchtime, but still, and bring my best gear for the battle ahead. The match time was set. Our EVE player was making his way to the planet side to provide orbital strikes, and slowly the players were pooling in. Our corporation leader had called on a couple of allies to bolster our numbers, but the entire pre-match lobby was an intense guessing game of how many enemy units would actually show up. As the match drew closer, radio silence was called as the squad leaders gave each team their objectives. Finally, we booted in. A typical match of Dust plays out like domination. There are 3 or 4 objectives on the map, 2 on the outskirts and 2 in the centre. While the bulk of our forces fought in the centre point, I was part of a strike team that would continually circle the outskirts, capping the 2 outside points. So the match starts, our team calls down an LAV, basically a warthog from Halo, and we cap our first point as our main strike force moves into the main battlefield. As the enemy team engages, we make a beeline for their point D. I was the squad's runner, so when we hit the point, it was my job to cap them. As we capped the enemy team's point, it seemed that they had a similar idea and capped ours. So ensued this game of cat and mouse, where both squads would try and cap the other's points quick enough to catch them off guard. Luckily, we were the first to do so, and as they tried to retake a point, we rushed them, blowing up their LAV and leaving their runner out in the open. This back and forth happened a few times, till we had effectively gained the point advantage we needed to pull ahead, and the match was ours. With the victory, our first flag on the frontier of space was placed. The feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction this victory achieved is one I've yet to feel rivaled in a multiplayer shooter since. It wasn't about the ISK, Dust currency, or experience gained. We had genuinely accomplished something in this game's world. The match and victory that ensued had a permanence and a meaning to it that other shooters simply didn't. Dust's world felt alive in a way that most multiplayers simply don't, and it brought out a genuine player fantasy that I haven't experienced in a multiplayer game. I felt like a genuine space mech, making a name for myself in this galaxy alongside my corporation. Dust would deliver endless moments like this. EVE players would hire out Dust troops to do battle for them, provided the rewards were sufficient. I engaged in many battles, fighting for planets and fighting to defend them. Every time I logged into Dust, I felt like I was logging into this universe. While everyone likes to call what Bungie did with Destiny an MMO like, Dust delivered the experience of an MMO shooter far closer than Bungie's game ever did. Mostly because Dust actually had chat rooms. Who knew being able to communicate was important? The feeling of something to fight for, of place and permanence, made Dust worth sticking around for. Dust's world, the planets and corporations you fight for and alongside, the opportunity to grow and change this world around you, made Dust a multiplayer experience I got lost in. As updates came, the game got better, and admittedly slowly, TCP's ambitious vision for the game started to come into focus. The possibilities for Dust felt endless. Talks of a PvE mode being added, more connectivity to New Eden, new battlegrounds. Still, one of my favourite ideas put forward for the game by Dust YouTuber Squad B was the idea of shipboarding combat, where Titans or other big ships damaged in a skirmish in EVE could be locked off and open for boarding or salvaging by Dust players who would gain a hostile takeover or deter would-be pirates. Because Dust proved the base idea behind its multi-game connection worked, anything going forward felt possible. Unfortunately, none of that would become reality. Ever since its launch, Dust 514's console choice was one of the most bizarre things about it. Releasing 3 months before the announcement of the PS4 would have been fine for any other game, but Dust 514 was a game with at least a 5-year roadmap ahead of it, being released onto a console that had 1 or 2 left at the most. Further, it didn't help that PS3's architecture just wasn't up to handling the game as ambitious as this. We're talking about a console that didn't even have party chat, trying to handle a cross-platform MMO like. It felt rough since day one, with connection and lag issues plaguing it throughout its life cycle. EVE's core player base chastised CCP for not putting this game on PC, and while I can sympathise with them not wanting to cannibalise EVE's player base, their decision instead to simply stay behind the times did them no favours. Even my time with Dust eventually ended because of it. When my PS3 eventually ended its life in mid-2014, Dust 5 and 4 was the only reason I was still returning to my old console. With the firm belief that the game would be ported or moved over to future consoles, I made the jump to next gen, expecting Dust to follow suit. Unfortunately, that news didn't come. Even after CCP called Dust 5 and 4 a profitable venture for them in March 2015, the game's future got muddied further with the announcement of Project Legion. Legion was weird. A semi-sequel / replacement to Dust, the game looked like a more next-gen and up-to-date version of Dust's idea, that would finally put the idea on PC, like so many fans were demanding. Though CCP tried to assure fans that the development would be split between the two, and that they were still focused on developing Dust, fans were apprehensive about how the new game would affect Dust's future. Little did they know that Dust's future would begin quite soon after. In February 2016, CCP officially announced that Dust 5 and 4 would be shut down on May 30th, 2016, and that Project Legion was cancelled. In the two cancelled projects' place was Project Nova. Though initially the difference between Nova and Legion wasn't clear, early gameplay would show a game with far more toned down focus, with only 8v8 matches taking place in small indoor maps. It also didn't help that CCP made a point that Project Nova would not even become a game, with CCP Rattati stressing, Project Nova is a project, not a product. There is no guarantee that it will become a CCP game. While many were staying optimistic that CCP was still committed to the dream of Dust in creating this next evolution of online shooter, the next few years of near enough complete radio silence would jade even the most hardened fans. For many, the one universe, one war dream began to fade. Dust 5 on 4 was overlooked by most, and discredited by others. But like most innovations and forays into new territory, Dust was special. Just like how the original Nier was given a mixed reception in 2010, despite having one of the most unique and revolutionary uses of the gaming medium to tell a story, its contemporaries largely ignored it, not seeing the deeper layers hidden within. Yoko Taro's special art finally got its chance to shine when in 2011, the game's sequel Nier Automata released, winning Game of the Year awards across the board and selling to date 3 million copies. In this example lies the silver lining of the story of Dust. While Project Nova seemed to fade into obscurity over the years, at this year's annual Fanfest, CCP finally opened up about the project. Seemingly changing their tune from "there is no guarantee this will become a game," CCP instead stressed their commitment to not just finishing the project, but righting the wrongs of its predecessor. The game's development is being assisted by Sumer Entertainment in the UK, and the company is said to expect to hear information in the next few months, not years. The entire time Project Nova has existed, however, there has been one point that CCP seemed dubious to answer. Will Nova connect to the world of Eve as Dust did before? So what was truly inspiring and uplifting to see in this short 5-minute display was when this text appeared in the background. One universe, one war. It seems despite all the hardships, the misfires, cancellations and rocky starts, CCP hasn't given up on not only their dream, but the community's dream of the truly universal war. Project Nova is the second chance, not just for CCP to make the game they wanted with Dust, but for players to finally be a part of something truly unique and special in the gaming industry. Dust 514 showed me a glimpse of a new evolution of the first-person shooter, one with real permanence, where I felt like my actions in a match would contribute to a larger conflict elsewhere. The sky is the limit for Project Nova. Since it went offline 2 years ago, there hasn't been a multiplayer game that engrossed me like Dust did. What CCP have done, and are trying to do again, is unlike anything else on the market. When the battlegrounds of EVE Online finally open back up, I will be the first to land with my boots on the ground in New Eden. Thanks for watching. This video has been something I've wanted to make and talk about since way before the idea of having a YouTube channel was a thing, and it's been great to finally talk about one of my forgotten gaming memories. I'm sure when Project Nova launches at some point later this year, I'll return to talk more about New Eden. But more so, this video reminded me how much enjoyment I get from looking back at forgotten games, and the kind of videos I want to make more of, looking at older games and why they faded into obscurity. My next video script is more or less done and ready to record, so I can't wait to dive back in. So if you like this video, a like is free, and subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.